Interesting to start with a speech by Cristiana Figueres, because she is certainly out there at the moment giving exactly that message, which is an interesting one from a government perspective that she's meant to have, that governments are increasingly irrelevant. It is a sort of message of despair at the moment, as I hope you can all appreciate. I mean, actually ignoring the dysfunctionality of government today is probably in the long run not actually going to help us very much. Because unless those governments begin to frame low carbon and zero carbon markets much more intelligently over time than they're doing today, even the most heroic endeavors of one bit of the private sector after another will eventually not prosper. So, for instance, tiny example, without a proper price on carbon, very difficult to work out exactly how it is that we're going to see the accelerated investments we need now on what is transparently so uneven a playing field as to beg a belief. So it's slightly dangerous advice, and I'm a bit nervous about it, to be honest, because it might persuade lots of businesses that perhaps they don't really have to worry about the gritty business of getting governments to step up to the plate as soon as they do. It might persuade them that all the investments they make in public policy can be scaled down because we're dealing with such recalcitrant governments that they can't possibly understand it. So just let them get on with it and we'll pursue our own furrow for the time being. I'm nervous about this. And I'm nervous about it because of the contrast between countries like the UK and countries like Germany. And if you want to know the difference between an intelligent, hands-on, strategically driven, business-friendly, de-risking government and all the opposite, just have a look at Germany and the UK. Just have a look at the difference at every level. And you'll see why government cannot be set aside. It cannot be required to wait until they suddenly see the brilliant things that the private sector is actually doing. You know what this is all about. The world collectively is heading into a massive outbreak of a particularly pernicious form of the frog syndrome. First, restore our growth, and then we'll sort out all this irritating stuff about climate change and biodiversity and all that. But first, back to growth. First, back to growth. I don't think we're going to get back to growth via your tree-huggy green economy, because we're absolutely not. I hope most of you are as disappointed with the way in which this government has responded to that opportunity as I am. Seems to me fairly clear now that we are not going to see a convergence between the pursuit of economic opportunity, jobs, new investments, skills, and everything else through the green economy, and this government's commitment to growth. I think it's almost impossible now, if you listen to the, not just the words, but the tone of George Osborne's speech at the party conference. He may have been playing to his right wing, but then maybe that's where he is anyway. So not just playing to them, but actually positively sucking up to them. So from that perspective, looking at it completely realistically, what was once called the Green New Deal back in 2008, at the time of the financial crash, when everybody looked around the world and looked at the big commitments made by world leaders in something like 22 different countries, that they were going to spend just huge amounts of money as part of the reflation story that each country brought forward. That new Green Deal has largely evaporated. According to HSBC, I presume I'm allowed to mention them here, according to HSBC, only 2 countries lived up to the commitments they made at the time of the new Green Deal. That's China and South Korea. Those are the only 2 countries that actually invested what they said they were going to invest as part and parcel of this reflationary story. So it's largely gone. And it is very difficult right now to think what's going to get it to come back again in the kind of speed with which we really need. Okay, I've probably depressed you all more than enough now. So let's look on the bright side, because as you know, that's what we're really all here for today. So firstly, multinational companies, by and large, really don't care about dysfunctional chancellors of the exchequer. It is a really very little concern to track George Osborne's strange journeying towards the UK Tea Party equivalent. They really don't care. Which is why it matters a great deal more to watch what is going on in terms of multinationals as they address these challenges all around the world. Tiny little example, Here in the UK, Unilever UK and Ireland probably scratch their head and say, what are we going to do in a kind of regulatory environment of this kind? Not much, I guess, as much as we possibly can. Unilever in India, Hindustan Unilever, committed now to the most astonishingly ambitious target to take all of its supply chain into a 100% renewable system within the course of the next 5 years. So multinationals can spread their risk and spread their leadership. They don't have to be bound by the lowest common denominator, dysfunctionality, in any political system. They can go where the leadership space exists and make their commitments there. Secondly, most companies today are not really focused on carbon. Let's be absolutely honest about this. They're focused on energy prices, commodity prices, efficiency, supply chain management, all of these good things that really ought to be done anyway and are being done increasingly, even if climate change was the fiction that some Jeremy Clarkson lookalikes still think it is. That pressure on price, availability, supply chain vulnerability is a very big deal for a very large number of companies, and I think they will pursue that whatever the latest story is around climate change. Thirdly, there is genuine leadership in this corporate area. It's very easy for NGOs still to stand back slightly and go down the good old greenwash route. If I compare the leadership in the business sector with the leadership in the world of government and the public sector, I think we know that we're looking at two completely different approaches, styles of leadership, patterns of commitment. That means we're beginning to see more exciting collaborations. We're beginning to see companies coming together at a global level to crack problems they can't crack on their own. And if you think about what's going on through things like the Roundtable on Sustainable Palm Oil, the Consumer Goods Forum, the leadership being shown by companies through these big global collaborations, this is exciting. This is capable of bringing more pressure to bear through the supply chain and at the customer end of things than governments sometimes realize. And I think we're going to see a lot more of that, in my opinion. And then lastly, of course, we do have technology, which is sort of out there still. Lots of things going on. I'm particularly focused at the moment on what I'm banging on about right now, which is the whole question about the cost of PV and the grid parity moment. The moment where a watt of energy from a PV system anywhere in the world costs no more than a similar amount of energy from any other energy generation source. Most people and most UK businesses and most of the big energy companies still think the grid parity moment is out there. Just don't worry about it too much. 10 years, 15 years, we'll start worrying about it at that point. They are completely unsighted on this. They have no sense whatsoever in terms of what's going on in China and elsewhere. And the likelihood now is that we might be heading towards a global grid parity moment within the course of the next 2 to 3 years. That is a revolution. And an awful lot of people, particularly in the investment world, in my humble opinion, will at that point be left looking like a bunch of absolute Charlies. Especially if they've been making full-on, high-pressure, business-as-usual investment in hydrocarbons, which, of course, most of them have, because you don't tend to think that hydrocarbons are going to go out of business anytime soon. And lastly, we are seeing an increase in what I call carbon literacy, not just in businesses, but amongst their stakeholders, amongst the organizations they work with in the supply chain, with partners. We're definitely seeing an uplift in terms of an understanding of the critical strategic significance of good, full-on carbon management strategies. Now, for me, the CarbonNeutral Company is absolutely the heart of that carbon literacy story. As you know, Jonathan and I are passionate advocates of what we call offsets done well, and will continue to be passionate advocates of that because it's part of an integrated approach to good carbon management. So in each of those 5 things, there is some truly exciting stuff happening. But anybody who think it aggregates up to a pure private sector play that dispenses with the need for government is living in the land of Nod.